A mother vanishes without a trace. 2 weeks later, her body is found buried in a shallow grave in a Maryland forest. And the man who led the search is the same one accused of killing her boyfriend and the father of her 2 children. Now, she's gone, he's behind bars, and the 2 kids are left caught in the middle of a nightmare. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the details. Lesbia Ramirez Guerra was just 23 years old. She was a daughter and a mother of 2. Her children only 5 and 2 years old. She lived in Waldorf, Maryland, with her boyfriend and the father of her kids, Keycy Barrera Rosa. They shared the home with several others. The last time anyone saw Lesbia was March 31st, 2025. 2 days later, on April 2nd, Barrera Rosa reported her missing. But almost immediately, detectives say they noticed something was not right. Inside the home, reportedly investigators found unusual and suspicious activity, enough to suggest Lesbia hadn't just walked away. They got a warrant and searched the home, but she was not there. Soon, the Charles County Sheriff's Office released photos of Lesbia and a red Toyota 4Runner. It was a family SUV that police believed was connected to her disappearance. They say that car was seen at the house on the day she vanished. It may have been used to move her body. Detectives asked the public to come forward. And as detectives searched the home Lesbia shared with Barrera Rosa, they uncovered something else: fake documents. They contacted U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. ICE confirmed the documents were counterfeit, which means Barrera Rosa, they said, was in the country illegally. He'd reportedly crossed the border in April of 2019. ICE took him into custody. But even with Barrera Rosa detained, Lesbia was still missing. Detectives pressed on, interviewing witnesses, combing through digital records, and chasing down every lead. Then, 2 weeks after she vanished, there was a break. Lesbia was found dead. She was buried near a stretch of power lines just outside Cedarville State Forest in Prince George's County, only 5 miles away from her home in Waldorf. Investigators say they dug 5 feet down. That's when they saw it, the edge of a blanket. Wrapped inside was Lesbia. After discovering her body, an arrest warrant was issued for Barrera Rosa. He's now facing murder charges and will be extradited to Charles County. But he wasn't the only one taken into custody. Police also arrested his uncle, Rovin Barrera. He's charged as an accessory to the crime for actions investigators say he took after Lesbia's murder. Lesbia's family is now left grieving, searching for answers and raising money. They launched a GoFundMe to help cover funeral expenses and return her body to Guatemala. The rest, they say, will go towards raising the 2 children she left behind. Children now without their mother and without their father, who stands accused of taking her life. And joining me to talk more about this is legal expert Gene Rossi. Gene, thank you so much for coming on today. Let's just jump right in. When someone reports a missing person or reports a person missing, what steps do authorities typically take in the first 24 to 48 hours?
Well, in the first 24 to 48 hours, as everybody knows, that's crucial to finding a missing person alleged. And when that happens, the police take it up a notch, if you will, and they spread the word within the department and in sister agencies in any county or jurisdiction. And if it's in a state, they'll spread the word throughout the state. I don't know if they go nationally yet, but in those 24 to 48 hours, people are on notice that there may be a missing person. They try to get as many details as possible to find out where they were last seen so they can focus within 5 to 10 miles of that area. But it's all hands on deck if it's truly a missing person.
How do investigators determine whether a missing person case involves foul play?
You never know. The thing with missing persons is it could be a child or a teenager or a young adult who is angry with a parent or guardian and has just gone away for 24 to 48 hours. Maybe stayed at a friend's house, stayed at a romantic partner's house, and it is just in an emotional state where they're not maintaining contact. And that could be totally innocent. They really won't know if it's something resulting from foul play until the hours start ticking away and you get more information. So you're really flying blind in those 24 to 48 hours if it's just a missing person.
Now, in this case, police say that they noticed, suspicious activity, allegedly. What makes certain activity in a home rise to the level of suspicious in a legal sense?
Well, blood, any disruption, any eyewitnesses that heard arguments or heard shots, any unusual activity that neighbors observed, like the lights are out at a certain time when they're usually on, there's cars in the driveway or near the house that they haven't seen before, individuals they haven't seen before. It just depends. It could be a variety of red flags and loud gongs that rises to suspicious behavior.
Now, the victim's boyfriend was charged with murder. What threshold must be met for police to obtain an arrest warrant for that?
Well, it goes back to the Constitution. You need probable cause to arrest somebody, and probable cause is a burden of proof. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not 51%, what they call preponderance. Probable cause is about 40% certainty. And that's the standard that a grand jury uses if they indict. They have to find probable cause. And if it goes to trial, you tell the jury at trial that an indictment is not evidence of beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just a ticket to get into the courtroom. So probable cause is a very low threshold, about 40% certainty to arrest somebody.
What's the legal difference between being charged with murder versus manslaughter? And is there any way, potentially, do you think that the suspect in this case could get charged with manslaughter instead?
It all depends on the facts. First degree murder requires malice aforethought, premeditation. It's a higher level of mens rea, guilty mind. Manslaughter is a little bit lower. It's sort of a diluted mens rea, a diluted guilty mind. Manslaughter can come in a variety of ways. Manslaughter could be reckless conduct, indifference to human life. It could be voluntary manslaughter. Voluntary manslaughter is in the heat of passion. I I've been married almost 40 years. Before my wife, if I had a girlfriend that I caught with somebody else and I got so angry, heat of passion, I took their life, that would be voluntary manslaughter. It would be premeditation. So it's a different level of intent.
And speaking of that, I know you just touched a little bit on first degree murder. What factors elevate a case to first degree murder? Is it that intent?
Oh,
Is it like, okay, he must have planned it, or maybe they got into an argument and the next day he decided to allegedly kill her?
well, I'll give you a good example. I teach a constitutional law class, and last night I was talking about a case where a husband had a mistress. And in the months before the death of his wife, he took steps to kill her. And the steps he took is he hired two hitmen, paid him each $1,000 to kill his wife. And he did that in weeks and months before she was finally murdered by the two hitmen. That's called premeditation. The defendant, accused of murder, has taken premeditated steps, intentional steps that lead up to a murder. It's not just heat of passion or a quick decision. It's you take steps days, weeks, months before the murder. That's classic premeditation. That would be first degree murder.
Also, police are alleging that the suspect is not from the United States, that they were in this country illegally. When ICE becomes involved in a case, how does that, you know, coordination with law enforcement typically work?
Well, I worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia for about 20 years. I supervised and or tried over 1,000 illegal reentry cases. Illegal reentry cases are when you're booted out of the country, you're removed from the country, and then you come back in without permission. So I did a lot of those reentry cases. And we oftentimes, when we were prosecuting reentry cases, they would be in ICE custody on administrative warrants. they would be picked up because they came back without permission. And what we would do is we would get a criminal complaint or get an indictment. A complaint is signed by a judge. An indictment is a grand jury document. And we would get that returned or signed by the judge or grand jury. And then we would send it to the ICE officials to have them turn over the body, the person that they had arrested or detained administratively. So it's not uncommon for the ICE officials and deportation officers to detain and arrest somebody administratively and essentially bring him into the administrative courts. And at the same time, we decide, you know what? This is an illegal reentrant. We're going to take him and prosecute him federally. So it's done all the time, and that's how the procedure works.
So what are just the legal implications of a suspect being in the country illegally during a criminal investigation?
Well, I can tell you this right now. If you do a criminal investigation, but you haven't charged that individual yet, that person could remain in ICE custody and go through the administrative immigration process. The problem with that is if it moves quick enough, that person may be deported before you charge them federally. And you could lose jurisdiction over them because once they're deported, they're in the other country. So you have to worry about timing. But when you have somebody who's detained, like in this case, administratively, and you probably will act a little faster in your investigation of murder, and it sounds like they did in this case.
Right, because I was just about to ask, could deportation interfere with the criminal prosecution? But I guess that's if they move slowly.
Yeah, let me make that clear. If a person is being held in ICE custody administratively, it's a non-criminal process. And then they're charging documents, an indictment or a complaint, federally or even state. Once they're filed, those criminal documents, an arrest warrant will be issued to the ICE folks, and then they will turn over the body to the proper authorities.
So let's say ICE turns over the person to the proper authorities. Can an undocumented person receive a public defender or legal aid?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Anybody who's charged in the United States, well, at least in the federal system, if you're charged in the federal system and the state, you're a person who's been arrested and you get all the rights under the Fifth and Sixth Amendments, speedy trial, right to counsel, and things like that. Have to be indicted by a grand jury if it's a felony. You get all those rights, and one of those rights is under the famous case Gideon versus Wainwright, where if you're charged with a felony and murder's a felony, you're entitled to a court-appointed counsel if you can't afford it. And that Gideon versus Wainwright case applies to not only state cases, but also, of course, federal.
Now, the uncle of the suspect was charged with accessory after the fact. Can you explain what that means and how is that prosecuted?
Go back to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth assassinated Abraham Lincoln. That's clear. But when he left the D.C. and went into Maryland, a few days later, he came upon the house of Dr. Mudd. Dr. Mudd fixed his broken leg and then let John Wilkes Booth go on his way. Dr. Mudd was an accessory after the fact because the argument is Dr. Mudd knew he had taken the life of Abe Lincoln, and he was helping the person who assassinated him escape apprehension. That's an accessory after the fact. Another good example, I see a bank robbery, and an hour later, I help the bank robbery get gasoline for his car or rent a car for him, and he gets the car and goes off. I have not conspired to rob the bank, but I'm an accessory after the fact of bank robbery.
Wow. So how many years could
I hope the wow was a good wow.
No, that was a good one. Like that definitely makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to figure out how many years could he be facing for that? Like, or could it
Well,
be pled down to probation?
that's an excellent question, Kennedy. When you're an accessory after the fact, the sentencing is a lot less than if you're a principal under the federal statutes and state probably. But the person who commits the bank robbery, they get the maximum sentence potentially. But accessory after the fact, your sentencing, even under the guidelines, would be relatively lower.
Could the uncle potentially face additional charges later?
Oh, absolutely. If they do an investigation and the boyfriend pleads guilty and cooperates, he could drag in the uncle and say, hey, you know what? He wasn't an accessory after the fact. He was there at the beginning helping me plan the murder of my girlfriend. And so he should be charged with further crimes. That could possibly happen. I don't know if it exists here.
How exactly, does premeditation get proven in court when it's not as clear cut, right? When there's not video or exact, eyewitness testimony?
To prove premeditation, if you don't have eyewitness testimony, if you don't have a confession, you have to do it the old fashioned way. It's called circumstantial evidence. Good example would be a person wants to kill his wife or his girlfriend, and the motive is a big fat life insurance policy. And circumstantial evidence could be the alleged killer took out a life insurance policy on the spouse or the girlfriend about 2 months before the murder and took other steps involving getting a gun, planning a trip. It would be circumstantial evidence to prove premeditation. If you don't have a confession, if you don't have a witness who heard a confession, and if you don't have direct evidence, you go the old-fashioned way, which is circumstantial evidence, where you're presenting the life insurance policy, which would be motive, other acts. You'd have to do it indirectly.
Now, we just spoke about the victim's boyfriend who police allege is in the United States illegally. What happens if a suspect is convicted but is undocumented? Do they serve their time in the US? Are they deported,
Uh,
or are they deported after serving time?
that's a great question, and it goes to judicial economy, economics. A lot of people feel that if they're here illegally, let's just get them out of the country. We don't need to send them to prison for 10, 20 years. When I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, we took sort of a compromise approach. We would ask for jail time in a federal prison, depending on the level of criminal history the individual had. So if a person, and the number of times they came back in the country illegally. Believe it or not, Kennedy, I prosecuted a guy or supervised a guy who came back 4 times into the United States after he had been kicked out. That's four
Wow.
illegal, that's 4 illegal reentries. And add to it the icing on the cake, he had criminal convictions, a total mess. That person deserves 7, 8, 9 years in federal prison here. But the run of the mill illegal reentrant, if you will, we usually wanted a shorter time, let him serve some prison time here, and then deport him. Once they finish their sentence federally, they're then deported or removed from the United States.
Can they tack on, a charge of, so let's say, allegedly he gets convicted, or we assume he gets convicted of murder. Could they also tack on that charge of illegal entry into the United States?
Yes, they could. Well, what would happen is if he's convicted at the state level of murder, he serves that time. If we decide to then charge him with a federal reentry charge or something like a federal crime, that would probably, at the sentencing on the federal charge, either be consecutive or concurrent, depending on the whim and caprice of the federal judge. You could do it concurrent, you can do it consecutive. so that after they serve their state time, they then do serve the federal, or it's concurrent, it's being served at the same time.
Are protections in place for the children of both the victim and the accused?
Oh yeah, at the state and federal level, there are programs that protect victims, that protect witnesses. The Witness Protection Program, Witness Assistance Program, Victims Funds. There are many ways you can help victims and witnesses uh, navigate through that criminal process so that they don't get in harm's way.
Well, how are custody decisions made in cases where both parents are removed from the home? Mom is
Oh,
gone, dad is in
oh, you'd
jail.
have to that. I'm really getting ahead of my skis here. If you have both parents who have issues, or in this case, you have one parent who's been murdered and then the other who has immigration problems, then that child or those children will have to go into foster care or go under the custody of the state.
Could they potentially, I know they said, the victim's family, I think she has a dad I saw in the GoFundMe. Could they potentially be in his custody, or do they have to figure things out and they're in foster care before they get
Well,
placed with another family member?
well, I can just use my experience. I had a defendant recently who was convicted, had to serve 2 years. She had a child, a couple children, and the grandfather of the children was allowed to take custody of the kids. So that's one option. It just depends.
Could this case qualify for the death penalty or life without parole in Maryland?
Well, I think in Maryland, it's very hard to get the death penalty charged or imposed. They've made it a lot harder. I don't know if the Maryland authorities will ask for the death penalty. If I had to bet money, they won't. But life, if you don't seek the death penalty, then it would be life without parole.
What's the timeline here? Like, how long does it typically take for a case like this to even go to trial?
Well, if you indicted somebody today on a high-profile case, which this seems to be, you could go to trial probably in at least no earlier than a year. Discovery, pretrial motions, continuances in a high-profile case of this nature. Probably no trial for at least a year. And that assumes that the defendant would not plead guilty.
Well, this is a case that we will definitely be following. Gene, thank you so much for coming on today. Lesbia's body was transported to the office of the chief medical examiner in Baltimore for an autopsy. Her cause of death is yet to be determined. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.